Brown. I'm the Assistant Director Training Coordinator of the Psychological Health and Performance Department Center in athletics. And I'm going to hand it over to Rachel.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Rachel Walker, the director. This week's topic is being connected in a disconnected time. And so before we jump into this week's topic, we are going to answer a couple of questions that were submitted to us from last week.
Yep. So Doc Walk, what would you say to an athlete who gets caught up in unhelpful thoughts more regularly?
First, I would say that I think it's normal to have automatic negative thoughts. I call them ants. I think it's part of being human. So for any of us that are on the call that aren't athletes, you probably experience those thoughts too. One thing is creating awareness around the thoughts, noticing when you're getting caught up in unhelpful thoughts, those ants, and then learning strategies to let go of the thoughts and refocus on, say, a positive thought or a strategic thought. And we will talk more about some self-talk, is what we call it, next week. And the topic next week is the power of self-talk. I think one other piece to acknowledge there is high performers train their minds. So there is a way for athletes to create that mental skill and build that mind muscle. One term that I love with that is the idea of whatever fires together wires together. So if we're constantly feeding those negative thoughts, those ants, yes, it's normal to have them. It's also part of the old brain. And so there is a way to notice, let go, refocus on positive thoughts. And then the more that you fire those positive thoughts, the easier it's going to be to refocus on those.
Great, thank you. And another question for you is, as a staff member, how can I support a student athlete who is struggling due to the drastic change to their daily routine, whether that be academically or athletically?
So if you notice in the handout that we sent out last week, part of last week's topics were the tips for times of uncertainty. And one of those things is the routine. When we talk to athletes in performance, we talk about the things that you can control, right? So when we're focusing on the controllables, the things that are in your power to take over, those are skills that athletes already have developed, right? So when you're speaking with your athletes, talking about how those mental skills can transfer to times like today with the times of uncertainty. So developing routines is one thing that athletes can control and one thing that they're used to, right? They're very structured. And so in a regular world, right? In a regular time outside of COVID-19. So that skill can transfer to this time of uncertainty. And the more that they can regulate their routine, and some of it might remain the same, right? So I would suggest going to bed. I'm a big fan of sleep, going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time. And then other things within that. So if they can structure their academic time, their downtime, when are they going to get their exercise in, right? Some of that routine is going to look different. They're working from home. That's a huge difference. And that's okay. So within the routine, also recognizing that it's probably going to look a little bit different and having some self-compassion with that.
Great, thank you.
So folks, thank you for sending us questions, and we encourage you to send more. You can email them to me at mac.brown@colorado.edu. So if you have any questions about our topic this week and our conversation today, email me, and then we'll pull one or two of those questions to answer during the first part of our video call. So we wanted to shift and talk a little bit about how do you stay connected when you're still trying to be physically distant from people in order to flatten the curve and protect everyone's health and well-being. So Rachel and I are going to talk a little bit about what some of those tips are for how you can stay connected during these unprecedented times. one of the tips that we wanted to start with is just about communication and how important that is, especially if you're finding yourself being in a space with people that you're spending a lot more time with. Those people can be housemates, they can be with significant others, they can be with family members. And so it's really important to remember that all of you are going through a stressful experience. You're all trying to navigate your routines, your schedule, and you're trying to do it in a shared space in a way that you may have never had to before, or maybe not to this extent. And so one of the things just to remember is effective communication. So a couple of quick tips on how to do that. Just remember to use I statements. I feel like I need a little bit of time and space. I feel like I'm getting a little frustrated. Can we talk about how to navigate when I have this meeting and you have that meeting? Or saying, hey, I need a little me time, and it's not me not wanting to connect with you. I need this for myself. So those are some examples of I statements that can be used. The other thing to also think about is that it's not about needing to be right when you're communicating with someone. You don't have to agree with the other person when you're having a conversation and communicating with one another. It's about how are you getting your thoughts and feelings across, and listening to the other person and doing all of those things in a respectful way. That's also something that's really important, not just in current times of communication and connection, but always. Rachel, are there other thoughts that you wanted to share on that topic?
Yeah, so I think specifically with times of uncertainty, right? In the time that we're in right now, and this can also apply in general, we also, as humans, have a tendency to kind of avoid the uncomfortable. And then at the same time, when there are, I think, challenging situations, our minds go to, worst case scenario. And so it's like this extreme of avoiding and worst case scenario. And so when we're in times like this where it's maybe a little more challenging, or if you're an athlete and you didn't have the performance you liked, it's embracing the emotional side of the mind and also the rational side. And when they come together, it's that wise part. And so one way to do that is to acknowledge the emotion. And so to say to yourself, I'm feeling anxious. For example, I'm feeling anxious that the hospitals aren't going to have the capacity. And I'm going to do my part and, respect the social distancing and also exercise to manage my own anxiety. So in that sense, it's expressing the emotional side of it, and with the rational side of it, recognizing what it is that's in your control in a situation of uncertainty. And then for those staff and coaches and even athletes with fellow athletes, following up with an open-ended question. So modeling it's okay that you're feeling anxious at this time, and how are you going to engage in your life in a meaningful way, take action in that, and then follow up with a question like, how are you doing during this time? How are you feeling during this time?
Yeah, and Rachel just brought up a really great point, which is the staying connected with your team, whether it's you as a player or you as a coach, or anyone else within athletics that has connections. Like, we can all stay connected right now, and we can get creative with how we're doing it. So I know that people have been doing virtual brunches or group yoga with a social hour after, or game nights. And one of the things that you can do, this is an opportunity, if you want to frame it that way, to be able to connect with people that maybe you don't typically connect with. So there's an option for creating like a buddy system within the team of having other athletes check in with those on the team that they're maybe not as regularly connecting with, and they can be supports for one another. But one other thing we did want to mention is that while we do have the benefit of having these virtual platforms for connecting, which is amazing and very helpful in times like this, there's also something to think about, which is this is a very different way of engaging with someone else and connecting with someone else. and it can actually be a very different felt experience of energy during that connection. So we thought it was important to also just highlight that there is such a thing as like Zoom fatigue or virtual connectivity fatigue, because it's just a different way of connecting. The camera's constantly on you. You know, you're on a screen, so that can be draining in a different way. So just remember that even if you are engaging in these ways of staying connected, if it doesn't feel quite the same, that's okay, because this is a totally different way of doing it. And so just being compassionate towards yourself in this experience.
Yeah, I would just add and encourage the staff members out there with your different, you know, departmental teams and coaches with their teams. Get creative in how you're connecting with your team members, with your athletes. I know for us at PHP, we always have lunch together. So in a normal time. So we try at least a couple of days a week to have Zoom lunches as a staff. We also do a team huddle in the morning, every morning, for 15, 20 minutes. And like Mac was saying, I mean, I'm big on energy, and it definitely is something that you do miss a little bit with Zoom. So although I'm grateful that we're able to connect in this way, it's okay if it does feel a little bit different, and also recognize where it might feel a little draining for you too. So with that, I am just gonna put a little bit of a plug in for our student athletes and for coaches and staff that are on the call today. If you can encourage them, we are gonna roll out a new group for this time for our student athletes. It will be starting next Tuesday, and it's based on this idea of connection. So really wanting to bring all of our student athletes together, no matter where they are in the country or internationally, to provide some support during this time. So the name of the group is called Hurting the Buffs, as supporting our athletes during COVID-19. And so it'll happen for the next 4 or 5 Tuesdays from 11 a.m. to noon, and the athletes will get a Zoom link for that. And with that, we will close out today. If you can join us next week, next week's topic is called The Power of Self-Talk. So please encourage your athletes and also other staff members to join us, and we will be talking through a metaphor and also teaching a skill for self-talk and the power of thoughts. Because I like quotes so much, we are going to close out today with a quote. If only you could sense how important you are to the lives of those you met, how important you can be to people you may never even dream of. There is something of yourself that you leave at every meeting with another person. Thanks to Mr. Rogers. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week, hopefully.